So thank you all for joining, and bear with me. Before we get started, I just wanted to shout out our subscriber campaign. So we are asking our members and our subscribers to reach out to friends, family, neighbors, anyone you may feel inclined to do so, and to invite them to become subscribers to our mailing list. We all came to Just Money Reform one way or another, and I'm sure we can all agree it wasn't easy. So by growing our mailing list, we can spread the news on our cause and invite more people to join the conversation. And so Fernanda already shared the link in the chat, and it is also found at monetaryalliance.org/subscribe. Super easy and straightforward. With that, I would like to cover AFJM's community guidelines, which we share in all of our spaces. We think it's really important that Alliance for Just Money spaces are comfortable and spaces where we can work together collaboratively for a better future. So number one is respecting our differences, be open to diverse perspectives and identities. We are not all the same. We do not all come from the same background and story. So let's respect that. Number two is recognizing social and power dynamics. Think consciously of your social positions, allowing us to work across our gender, our age, our education, race, etc. Guideline number three is being open to discomfort and learning, acknowledge your values and visions, but be ready to have them challenged. None of us in this room knows everything, and we need to be open to that. There might be some things we learn that make us uncomfortable or make us question things about ourselves that we haven't questioned before, and that's not always easy. So be open to that and be patient with yourself and with everyone in the room. Guideline number four is speaking thoughtfully, be clear and concise, avoid acronyms. I know I used one earlier and I did not mean to. So jargon is just a way to confuse people along the way. So the more that we can spell things out and just slow it down a little bit, I think the better off we'll all be. Guideline number five is listening attentively. Challenge yourself to listen more than you speak. Actively listen to understand before you respond. Coincidentally, we will be talking a little bit more about this during our presentation, so stay tuned. And the last one is respecting your needs. Alliance for Just Money runs on the energy of volunteers and staff in the community. So ask for help when you need it, give what is healthy for you to give, and protect your own mental and physical well-being. So be gentle with yourself and with others. We are a community and we have each other. So let's, whatever it is that you need in the moment, do that and take care of yourself. And that goes beyond just this space. The kind of work that we're doing is hard. So respecting your needs is very, very important. And with that, I will hand it over to Sam Hummel and we'll get started.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So the purpose of this coffee house is to report back to the larger AFJM membership about, in particular, a process that the Youth Caucus tried out using a collaboration process called a design sprint. And it's a method of collaboration that's used a lot in corporations and maybe also in government some, but also in academia. And that's where I encountered it. I participated in one design sprint with Duke University, working on well-being economics and developing ideas around well-being economics. And the idea is to, instead of kind of like, or in addition to, like, the Youth Caucus has, one meeting a month, And, in one meeting a month, there's only so much you can get done. And then it's a whole nother 30 days, before you see everybody again and have the opportunity to do something else. And so the idea of the design sprint is to meet really intensively with a focus on a particular project, and actually use the time in the meetings to get the work done, to do the work, co-working style. So during each of these sessions, for example, starting May 2nd and going through May 19th, we had periods of time during the sessions where we were microphones and videos off, each just doing work, and then coming back together and reporting what we had done or what we'd learned, and then again going off and microphones off, videos off, doing work, and then coming back together and reporting what we'd done. So the idea is, one of the benefits of this is that you can, if it's work that you can kind of divide and conquer, as you'll see we did, you can get a lot done in a short amount of time, because if you have 8 people working for half an hour, that's 4 hours worth of effort in a half an hour. So you have a lot to show for a short amount of time, and it's pretty fun. I want to say, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we're going along. If you have, we can also unmute people. The plan, I skipped a slide earlier, but the plan is to walk you through the whole process, what we did, what we experienced, what we learned, in about 30 minutes, hopefully. And then we can just open it for conversation. But if you have questions or comments before we get through it all, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try and see them and answer them. So the impetus for this design sprint was the idea that I in particular have a sibling who's very involved in the climate movement. I have also been involved in the climate movement, and when telling them about the monetary system stuff, they kept saying, let me introduce you to some people in the monetary system, in the climate movement, that I think would be interested in this. And I personally did not feel that I was prepared to field those introductions. Some of them were the names that were being suggested were pretty high level people. And in particular, I felt that that mapping of really mapping what the climate movement is already doing, because the climate movement is very focused on the banking sector already. I thought that we needed to do some research and really deep listening to the thousands and thousands of hours of effort that the climate movement activists are already putting into addressing the banking sector, before just jumping in and saying, hey, we think we have a better idea than you have. So the goal of this design sprint was to really focus on listening. So we did broad listening, online research, deep listening, profiling specific organizations. Then we did some brainstorming to kind of imagine, based on what we had learned through the broad listening and deep listening, what climate activists would need to hear from us in order for our message to resonate with them, given what we were seeing they were already working on and doing. And then we would need to select out of the thousands of awesome, monetary reform books and papers and, videos and everything, select out what would be the ones that would be most helpful to climate campaigners. And then we wanted to have some talking points prepared. And then our goal was on Thursday, the 19th, to actually have a climate activist on the line and use our talking points and use our resources. And unfortunately, I kind of didn't get that lined up properly. So we didn't get a chance to practice it on May 19th, but we have had 3 conversations with climate activists since then, and have had a chance to use these resources with them. All right, so we used throughout the design process a very participatory effort, where we divided up the work so that it wasn't so much on one person's shoulders. So we had somebody who is like Chris, who is responsible for organizing the Google Docs to track all the work that we were doing. And Ryan was doing the calendar and Zoom wrangling, and I was doing facilitation planning, and Steve was doing timekeeping and so on. And that really worked super well and made it fun and made it very collaborative. And yeah, I will say the design sprint did attract additional people that probably wouldn't have joined the Alliance, but they were or come for just monthly meetings, but they were excited by the idea of of a short time intensive project. All right, so now we're going to go through those steps and tell you for each step of our design submit process what we did and what we learned and what value we think we produced out of it that could be useful to you and to the Alliance for Just Money. So Ryan, take it from here.
Thank you for that awesome introduction. So if you recall, while I was giving sharing the community guidelines, I emphasized our guideline about listening. And so for the first week, which was 2 sessions, each at 2 hours long, we focused on doing broad and deep listening or research. And so the first session was broad listening. And for that, we did a survey across various social media platforms and research platforms. And so each of us that you saw on that last slide, we picked a website and we stuck with it. And we were searching for organizations, people, and campaigns that focus specifically on climate and banking. So this is a really targeted search that we were doing for our design sprint. And the difference between broad and deep, which I'll just touch on very quickly, is that deep research we took, after we organized everything from our broad research findings, we then did like a deeper dive and to really get at the root of what these organizations are aiming to achieve. And so so what we found out of broad researching is we found this wonderful list of organizations with climate campaigns targeting big banks, which, if that's not obvious in this space, any group that's targeting banks is a good group for us because we are also targeting banks in some way, shape, or form. So some of the groups that we found: Stop the Money Pipeline, Banking on Climate Chaos, which the organizations listed under that are already signed on to Banking on Climate Chaos, but they each are doing their own wonderful organizing that is important to the work we're doing. So soon, our name will be under Banking on Climate Chaos as well. And you'll also learn throughout this that we want to sign on to other people's missions as we are asking for them to sign on to ours. A few others: Extinction Rebellion, Third Act, 350.org. The list is there. We have it documented. And this is a resource that we plan on sharing to some capacity, definitely within our members and within Alliance for Just Money. So be on the lookout for this. And yeah, that's it on that. So some of the learnings from our broad research, some patterns that we came across, and this is all harvested from the Google Docs that Chris was managing and keeping track of. So as we were doing research, we were documenting it. And these are the themes that came up consistently. So we highlighted some that we think are worth really mentioning. They're all really great, valid points, but the ones that are highlighted are ones that really stood out to us. So there's a big emphasis out there on moving money to green banks, public banks, and credit unions. And that is something that is a leverage point for us. These are all certainly alternative options to our current money system. And also there's more that can be done, which is where we come in. And then there's a focus on the need to fund the Green New Deal, which is, that's news, right? That we can use as a leverage point. And then some connections that we saw between efforts. People are looking for accessible changes that make an impact. And one thing that we run into is like our change, our reform that we advocate for at Alliance for Just Money is going to have an impact that directly impacts everybody, and hopefully for the better and for the good. And that's something that we all like, we need as many people we can to advocate for just money reform or some kind of money reform. And we can use that as a way to get across how that can help other movements achieve their goals. So something that we didn't see, which probably doesn't come to as a surprise to many of us in this room, is that there was little talk about bank money creation, except from monetary reformers. So that is, again, not a surprise, but we didn't come to this conclusion lightly. Like, we spent a lot of time looking into this. And then one thing that we learned is it's important to distinguish between the big banks doing the vast majority of fossil fuel financing and little banks and community banks and credit unions. So as mentioned in the pattern we found with green banks, public banks, and credit unions, there's a good conversation that can be had out of that point, and recognizing that having discussion around the differences there and making sure that those are clearly understood.
Cool. So we're gonna, I'll just pause here real quick if anybody has any questions for Ryan, and just say that one of the tools that Ryan mentioned was a social media research tool called BuzzSumo that one of the participants, Benji, was using to find the most viral content on the internet in the last 5 years that had to do with both climate and banking. And what he found was that calls to action for people to do things like move their money to credit unions or to public banks or to green banks. Those were the kinds of accessible changes that people seem to be really resonating with and looking for, because those were some of the by far most viral content out there on the internet about banking and climate. It wasn't the, the like critiques. It was the you can do something. You can do something that's going to be meaningful kind of messages that were going the farthest. And because of that, the fact that that's resonating with people, that's why we were thinking, it's going to be important in our messaging to kind of separate out the little guys banks from the big bad banks that are doing all the $4 trillion of fossil fuel financing. Because, yeah, I hope that makes sense. I saw a hand go up.
Yeah, real quick, did you guys come up with those questions, that set of questions, or are those design sprint questions?
As the facilitator, the person doing the facilitation planning, I came up with those questions.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Great questions.
But do you like them? All
Great.
right.
Yeah. I guess next I'll talk about deep listening, and the first part, like broad listening had been, we each took kind of a social media platform or something, and like seeing what is the most common content, or what relevant stuff is out there. And for deep listening, we went and we each took an individual group and tried to dig in as much to that one organization as we could during the second time. And all this is time boxed, so we're co-working for for part of the 2-hour sprint session. And so sometimes people said, 2 hours didn't feel like enough. Well, maybe two weeks wouldn't feel like enough. There's so much information, but it's amazing what kind of information you can get when you have 8 different people looking at one organization. You start to hear some themes and stuff that emerges over the tasks of it. So some of the things we learned from diving deep on these, like a thing that excited us was Stop the Money Pipelines principles are a pretty good match for the Alliance for Just Money's mission. It's neat seeing local groups like putting up photos, and you see it on a lot of websites, and that really did make for an accessible call to show up and do something, and people do tend to get excited about that stuff. Yeah, calls to actions that are well targeted, and one of the things that can make it very accessible is having social media toolkits. So even if somebody can't show up to a particular event at a place and time, they may be able to take action with a toolkit, and can give them they don't have to, with their limited amount of time, like they're able to add their voice to the movement. We also saw lots of reports of previous successes, like change, like people are able to do pressure campaigns on banks and insurance companies to having an impact on coal in particular investments. Some of the things we didn't see was anyone maybe accepting Positive Money UK or Extinction Rebellion UK, talking about how bank money creation is a source of money being lent to fossil fuels. And even then, it wasn't it wasn't very super accessible. It was a little bit buried. Yeah, and these are just some of the photos. You can see it doesn't take a ton of people. I mean, you can have a decent photo with half a dozen people and some great signs. Even just a couple dozen people can make a pretty impressive and exciting action. So hopefully we will see more of that.
Either way, the more the merrier. So please join us on the next design sprint. I'm going to be talking about how we further analyzed the messaging that we found within all these organizations. So Sam, if you can. So we categorized what we saw that these players were talking about into these two main targets. So one approach was to go directly to the central banks and ask them to be more of a regulatory oversight approach to make sure that the banks that they manage in their system aren't making any risky fossil fuel investments. So some of the groups like Positive Money, Fossil Fuel, Fossil Free Federation, 350, and Oil Change International were taking that approach. The other approach that was quite popular and really called our attention because it's a form of like an ultimatum from consumers to ask the banks to voluntarily adopt more policies that are compatible with what we desire as consumers in a climate crisis world, that they not invest in fossil fuels as much. So we found like a petition on Third Act where you can, as like a Chase bank customer, tell Chase that, hey, if you don't move your investments out of fossil fuels, I'm going to take my money out of the bank. So they really focus on how the banks, their belief that the banks are using only the loanable funds that people put into the bank account, rather than being aware of real bank creation. So we as the Youth Caucus really believe that that's an approach that needs more attention. So on the next slide, perhaps, we looked also at how the messaging occurred. So the players had their audience. It was either the central banks or the customers. For example, this group wanted customer withdrawals. So as I was saying, you can ask Chase, if you're a customer with them, to take that money out. Another campaign strategy that was very useful is to, target the reputation of the big banks and say, hey, we're Oil Change International or Rainforest Action Network, and we're going to showcase your investment data and show all your customers where you're putting your money. Other approaches that were, lead to great photos are like nonviolent protests, Extinction Rebellion. All of these approaches and campaign strategies have different pros and cons. You need a certain amount of people to pull it off. So Third Act, Banking on the Better Future, those have done that kind of approach. There's also policy advocacy, for example. You could have a legislation that would mandate certain banks to not invest in fossil fuels, and that would be a kind of regulatory approach as well. And of course, similar to like exposing their investments, you can rank and spank, like say which bank is doing a better job at being green and living up to their promises of zero carbon or whatever. So on the next slide, we further found in our analysis of messaging that, once again, people are talking about the bad behavior of banks and what they're doing with your money, how they're funding extinctions, how they're funding harm to indigenous communities, how they're really failing us in the transition to green technologies. But there wasn't anybody talking about why the banks have this privilege in the first place. So what's missing, and really important point for us as AFJM, is why are the banks making these funding decisions in the first place? And shouldn't we be questioning that special privilege? So that's our approach, and we would like to further grow this movement of climate divestment. So on the next slide, in addition to having central bank approach and the voluntary bank commitments, we believe that asking for sovereign money and demanding that the government really reclaim its power and privilege to create money and the backing of things that are bad for humanity and the planet, we really want to ask for that approach to be taken. So that's what we've been doing as the Youth Caucus, is really trying to vamp that up, is talking about sovereign money as much as we can. And that's it.
Just pause quickly and see if any hands go up. Lucille, thanks for the question earlier. If anybody has any questions for Fernanda or for Steve or for me.
Yes. I had a question. I think it was Steve skipped over the last, he changed the slide before talking about the last two sections. It was right before Fernanda. Yep, the last two. What questions do we have? What did we learn? I didn't have time to read those.
Oh, you want to better read those? Yeah, we just picked a few highlights to talk about. We can make all of these slides available, but yeah, feel free to pause. We can pause here for a second if folks want to read what's on the right there.
It would be great to have these slides available, like in Groups IO or something.
Yeah.
Or at least to this participant group.
We'll take a, Ryan, let's take a section from, because it's actually one giant slide deck that was used throughout the entire design sprint for capturing everything, all of our work and everything. So you're looking at I don't know, maybe 20 slides or something out of that deck. So we'll excerpt these slides and send them out. Or put them in groups.io.
Okay, thank you.
And just to mention Groups.io, if you're unfamiliar with that, it is it's an online forum that is that we do have exclusive for our members. So if you're not a member, you might not be on that forum. If you're interested in being on that forum, we do a lot of resource sharing there. You're welcome to become a member, which would help our movement grow.
And I see a hand up from Franz.
You might want to unmute.
Okay.
Franz, we can't hear you.
Sorry that I didn't unmute. First of all, congratulations for the whole group by thinking about this connection, asking really good questions, and then organize it well in a good slideshow. And I have one major comment. And I think this is an important research a bit further in terms of the kind of framework. Simply to give an example, I've been a climate scholar and activist for about 20 years. And with the financial crisis in 2007, I really started asking myself, why did this happen and what can be done about it? And so after studying quite a lot on the monetary field, I published my first book. And my main position is that monetary transformation can really, or the monetary system itself, though it is, so the monetary system itself can be used to basically attack the climate crisis. And so the idea was to have a new monetary system that is based upon a standard, and the standard with the decarbonization standard or optimal solarization. So there you have the connection of the climate crisis and present modern monetary thinking. And so now, in about 3 days, I will publish a new website, which is called, very simple, Transform Money. Not only reform, but transform. And one of the things one of the pages that I'm working on is youth and
Franz,
money.
You've cut out.
And I would really,
Franz, actually, if I could just pause you there for just 1 second and just say, we're going to open the floor for a conversation about the intersection between the monetary reform movement and the climate movement when we get done with the presentation about the design sprint. So that'll be just a few more slides.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, let me keep the questions at this point to just questions that are about the content that we're presenting here and any clarifying questions.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll have time for discussion in just a minute here. All right, let's see where we were.
I do see,
Compiling resources.
Here we are. Okay. There
I
we go.
do see Mark's hand up, and before Mark goes, I did just want to highlight from Fernanda's slides that on one of her last slides, we had some organizations that were highlighted, and I think it was the one before this maybe, or yeah, right there. And the ones in yellow seem to be open about their belief in the fractional reserve or loanable funds system. So that was an interesting point to note. And you'll notice that to kind of narrow in our research, I guess, at the end, or at least have a direction to go in, we kind of thought that those were the best organizations to reach out to first, because there's some learning that can be done there. So yeah, I just wanted to point that.
Thank you, Ryan. That's great. So yeah,
And Mark
Mark.
Mark Young, did you have a question about the slides?
Yeah, I did. Generally, a good job. I think this is turned out to be a great exercise. It looks like. Some reason my video is not working out. Two questions. What's the overarching purpose of this? Is this just, I know it's to reach out, but I guess what do you want us to take from it? Is it an example of how we should incorporate these things in our message when talking to people? Is it to give a critical analysis of what's presented or add to it or take away from it? And then also, is the plan to do this for other subject matter beyond climate? So other issues that may plague society. But that's it.
Great question, Mark. So first of all, I think in just wanting to share back what we did, there was an interest in just, this was an experiment for us to even see if this way of collaborating, doing an intensive co-working, effort would be something that we enjoyed and that it would be productive. So we ended up, I think, deciding that it was pretty productive, and we feel good about the things that the experience of it as well. And we learned some things, as you'll hear in a bit, about kind of how we would do it differently if we did it again. So one of our goals was to just share back with the AFJM about this method of collaboration that is well suited for virtual collaboration, and see if, make it available as an offering to others that may want to adopt the method for other projects. We haven't actually discussed, as far as I'm aware, of doing a design sprint for other movements, like say the labor movement or the student debt movement or things like that. But I think that could easily be done with an even much shortened design sprint now that we have have done it once. So if people were interested in that and wanted to resource that type of deep and broad listening and outreach, we could definitely, that could be an outcome of this conversation. And then the third question you asked was what kind of feedback we wanted from you. And I think the couple of types of feedback is one, just on this process, does it look like something you want to know more about or would want to discuss using any more with Alliance for Just Money? And then the other one, I think, would just be, if you see any learnings or opportunities within what we learned, or have any particular, suggestions or insights, about where we could go with this information.
And one last thing to add to that is we do have some asks at the end for AFJM, or at least for folks on this call. So we will cover some more specific things that we do hope to get out of this.
Thanks, Ryan. Joe, you have your hand up. The question about our presentation before we get it done here. Let's see here.
I do.
Great.
I just, with all these interesting group names that you mentioned at the beginning, I just wondered, given that we already have a relationship with the Green Party and the Green Party has endorsed monetary reform, did you have any further communication with them? Thank you. And by the way, a great presentation.
Thanks, Joe. No, we haven't. And during this design sprint, we didn't actually do dialogues with any organization. We were just trying to kind of really get a landscape scan of everything, so that when we did start having dialogues with people, we would be able to, feel confident that we had some idea of what was already happening in the space, specifically with regards to bank financing of fossil fuels. And the Green Party, in our social media research, did not flag high, at least in the social media research that we did, for having a high profile in terms of discussing banking and climate in the same breath, or having a specific campaign that's targeting banks about climate in the same breath. That isn't to say that there aren't many other organizations like the Green Party that are aware of, banking and climate and the nexus of the two, but don't necessarily have a campaign going right now that's getting a lot of attention, on social media, which is kind of what we were looking for, is who are the folks who are making the most noise and most movement on this issue right now.
Thank you.
All right, great. So we're gonna, good. I'm glad we got a little audience participation there. We might, I think, just roll on through here, and that way we can just turn it over to conversation. So the next part of the design sprint was to try and identify within all the many great resources, what are the ones that we thought would be most monetary reform resources? What do we think were the ones that would be most useful to directly deliver and put in the hands of climate activists that we might reach out to? And the way we did that was we just had everybody identify the monetary reform resources that had been the ones that had actually brought them into this work, and been most helpful for them in getting their minds around the work. And so we just kind of were going with the idea of like what works, what's been proven, in our own experience for bringing us in here. Might be some of the most useful things for the climate folks. We recognize that may not be true, in the sense that maybe we are oddballs in that we ended up here as a somewhat small group, right? So maybe the best resources are yet to be, are not the ones that spoke to us, But in any case, what we did, just so you know how this prioritization exercise went, was we had everybody identify the top 3 or 4 resources that had brought them in or had been useful to them. And then we used a spreadsheet to have everybody call them out one by one, and we identified the ones that had the most hits. And then we organized those into a worksheet. We shared that with a few folks for feedback, and got the feedback that it was an overwhelming list, even though we tried to make it look pretty with, little thumbnails and things. And that they wanted more of a narrative. And so then we reformed it into this thing that's on the right, the third image you're looking at there, which was a little bit more of a narrative info sheet. And we're, surely that is still version 0.01 of what a great monetary reform info sheet for climate activists will eventually look like. But it was good enough to get started, and at least we have something that speaks specifically, we think, to climate activists. So at this point, and we were happy to share that with you, and of course would welcome constructive feedback on it. All right, Brian, you want to go to the next milestone in our design sprint?
Yes, so now that we've done our deep listening, we've done our research, we've organized things, we kind of have a sense of where organizations, where their goals are, what their mission is, and from there, how do we reach out to them? So one key piece before diving into that initial contact, we thought about how we could approach climate campaigners with empathy. And so we thought about how we would want to be approached. And some things that came to mind were with appreciation for the organization's current efforts and past successes as joiners. This is one that where this will tie into our asks at the end of this presentation. Is we think it's important, if you're going to participate in outreach, to have already signed on to their efforts in some way, shape, or form, and have taken action with them. That's going to show them that you're already invested in their movement, and that this connection, if as a supporter of their cause, if that's going to give us a better chance of being taken seriously. And also, we're asking people to join us, so we should be able to join other people. With curiosity about the climate organization's goals and needs, yes, we at Alliance for Just Money have our own asks. And we have our own stories that we want to share. So allowing an opportunity for the person on the other end to also share their stories with us. With clarity about the common ground between our work. So we thought it was important to come into that conversation already making connections with the work they are doing to the work that we're doing. So that's through shared values, common concerns, common enemy, things like that. With brevity and conciseness, we like to acronym everything, which is great for working internally, because if we took the time to spell out every acronym within this group, we'd be wasting way more time than we already do. So it's just important that we do spell it out with folks who aren't already sold on to our set of acronyms. With a clear ask, and this one is tricky because it's like, what direction do you go in? But if by the end of your first communication, you don't have a very clear direction for what the next step is, it's easy for that conversation to fade. So really having an ask in our contacts. And then with a collaborative spirit and mutual respect, we're in this together. And then creative thinking, anything is possible. There's too much at stake for us not to try. So we really need to just get out there and think creatively and strategically.
Ryan, can you comment on the second one to last item that you skipped?
Sorry, with an informal phone conversation. So basically the thought is that emails are great, but sometimes, like if you have a phone contact, a phone call can really solidify a more formal meeting. So yeah,
Ryan,
but you don't, oh, sorry.
Oh, I just thought I would maybe say that at the beginning, we thought that the first thing we would want to do is provide a briefing to these folks about monetary reform. And so I think I think I wrote that one. So just in case, so what I meant by it anyway is, for those who know, is that we realized that having a more informal conversational script versus like a briefing that we were inviting people to when we reached out over email was the way to go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking of with a radical gathering, that's something that we practiced a lot with. We tend to get farther when we make a phone call than just emailing folks. So that's where my brain was. And from those, from the empathetic approach, we developed some talking points and a script, which if you've ever participated in phone banking or anything along those lines, it's helpful to have some kind of direction and focus in the conversation. And so we made a script that you can scrap all of it, but really it's just a way to guide the conversation and make sure that you're hitting the important points. And yeah, there's some parts of the conversation that you might have already covered through email or other means. And so really it's just a tool to build on. I think that's all I have to share about that.
And I will say we have had 3 conversations now with climate folks, and I have reviewed the script each time beforehand. And while we haven't ever followed it even remotely closely to like word for word, just having it in mind has been really helpful for, anticipating the things that the other person is going to need in the conversation and kind of a good order to bring them through. So just to say this process that we tried out, we did collect some feedback from people afterwards. We got basically 100% response rate. And in addition to this question, we learned a number of other things, but the positive thing was that a number of folks did feel that it was something that was not only something that they might do again, but that they would even recommend to a friend. And that's what you really need to grow an organization, is for the people that are already in it to feel like it's something that, you know, that there are things that are happening in the organization that they would want to invite other people into. So that was exciting. We did learn some things that we would probably do differently. Like we would probably scope down the project to just 4 sessions instead of 6. And I, as the facilitator, did, you know, really program the time within the 2 hours down to like every 5 to 10 minutes. And, you know, that was a lot of work. I did that to try and keep it, you know, moving and give us the opportunity to kind of switch between individual work and group work and individual work and sharing and so on. But ultimately, I think that was a lot of effort and we could have made it simpler. Definitely having a co-facilitator to kind of avoid tunnel vision, and also just to be able to you know, bounce ideas off of would be helpful. And yeah, we mentioned earlier, it was my bad we didn't get a climate activist to join the last session. And I mentioned that just to say that that is really one of the keys of the design sprint process, is that the idea is that in the last meeting of the design sprint, you ship your product. So whatever it is, that this whole idea that Steve mentioned earlier of like being time constrained, the idea behind design sprints is that that's an advantage, because you just have to go ahead and get the 80-20, you know, the 20% that's going to produce 80% of the benefits. You have to focus on that and get that 20%. It's going to be 80% good enough. And the thing that makes that real is the fact that in the last session, you're going to ship the product. And if you don't have that in the last session, then it's easy to get distracted and get perfectionist and all these things and not actually end the sprint with a product that's ready to be used. And so we actually did finish with products that are ready to be used, but that was in spite of not my failing to get a climate activist on the line at the time that our meeting was regularly scheduled to happen. So anyway, that was a little disappointing, but I'm really proud of the group for pushing through and, you know, finishing with things that were really ready to go. We are following up, working on scheduling introductions with a few climate activists. We've had conversations with 3 already. And, you know, the idea is that hopefully maybe we can, you know, kind of, we're starting at the outer rungs, but, you know, maybe we could eventually, you know, through these conversations, reach some really strong spokespeople, famous, you know, writers and journalists like maybe Naomi Klein or Bill Kibben. That's just an idea, that, you know, if we can win over a few people kind of at lower rungs and they want to introduce us up to the next level and we get better and better at briefing and collaborating, that's kind of the long-term vision idea. All right, Stephen, you want to go for action items?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, it is ambitious. But yeah, well, some of the things that we are looking forward to doing on the next slide here, we're like we are recommending having some more partnerships. The Youth Caucus was impressed with Stop the Money Pipeline. There's a pretty giant list of partners on there, and Sam noted the Alliance for Just Money would be what, 4th or something on the list in there at the moment or something. So it'd be neat to be at the, you know, towards the top of the list of signers. It'd be great to see in, you know, our name up there with a big list of other ones. Some people may go down the line and click, oh, I haven't heard of them. Let me read their website and become more familiar. And it would be an opportunity to get a bunch of, you know, possibly more subscribers and people to, yeah, it is a wonderful marketing opportunity to be on there. this isn't even the whole list. There were hundreds, I think, on this one, and there are other like kind of environmental coalition groups. And yeah, we'd recommend the Alliance to sign on for the Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition. There's like a Google Docs thing on what you fill out.
This link in the chat here.
In the chat, yes, excellent. And yeah, because there are a few other groups as well that the next one that we were talking about would be a third act. It might be you know, because this is what, like you know, over 16 stuff would be the idea of third act, recommending that some of the Alliance members might participate in working groups of it. Like maybe an opportunity for, if people aren't aware of how you know, like that, you know, money creation is happening with loans, like that'd be a good opportunity to raise awareness of it in some of these working groups. And this Bill McKibben had created this group after, you know, like 350 work and stuff that started Third Act.
And John, I see you here, and I was just thinking that Third Act has a really perfect overlap in a lot of ways with, for example, what you've been doing, the League of Women Voters, in that they have picked as their two major campaigns and focus areas. One is democratization and democracy protection, and the other one is fossil fuel finance and climate, but in particular fossil fuel finance is what they're focused on, and from the banks. So anyway, it's quite a marriage there. And as Steve mentioned, the group is specifically for people who are 60 and up, they're trying to kind of be the counterparts of the youth movements of like 350.org and the Sunrise movement. So anyway, yeah, anyone is welcome to join.
And what now we're opening the floors again for more general questions.
Yeah, that's the end of our presentation. Yes.
Thanks for the invitation that anyone's welcome to join. It's lovely.
I'd like to say something. I think Sam and Ryan and Fernanda, I think you've really done a wonderful job with this thing. And you've essentially formalized in this very collaborative way many of the things that sort of we did in the League of Women Voters in terms of being involved with that organization before we ever came to them with the monetary reform ideas. And so the idea of reaching out and becoming a member of another organization like this, I think, is a perfectly reasonable way to go. And I think in particular, because the organizations of which you've been speaking about tonight have a clear goal that everybody shares. That is to say, you know, saving the earth. And we don't have that in monetary reform. We don't have a clear goal that's shared by a whole lot of people already. Because very few people, you know, think, well, we've got to change the monetary system in order to, people aren't thinking along those lines, but a lot of people are thinking about what's happening to democracy, what's happening to climate, what's happening to meeting social needs. And so by going to these organizations that are, and being able to show them how fundamental the monetary system is to what they're trying to accomplish, I think that's a really good way. So I really appreciate the information you brought together on these various organizations that are in the environmental movement, and I think the patterns that you sort of outline and how to proceed are terrific.
Thanks, John. I imagine that the types of principles that you've developed with the League of Women Voters are going to be exactly the types of things that some of these other groups are going to want to see to try and wrap their minds around, what the future would look like. And so thank you for your work with that. Lucille, did you want to, I don't know why you just popped up on my screen. So does anyone else have their hands up or anything?
A guy popped up because I turned my video on, but I think John's point was really apt that our message, while it's clear, it's important to us, but it's not widely shared, whereas the climate message is. And our approach to our work in some ways has to be different in light of that. And what you've done in this design sprint, and John and League of Women Voters, I mean, I think is a crucial approach for bringing the message that is relevant to their specific issue, but they don't necessarily know it. But the way and the respect with which and the learning with which that you've demonstrated here is dialogical, is in the full sense of what that means philosophically. And I think it will bear fruits to some extent with some groups. So kudos to you all. Thank you very much.
All right, we got Mark and then Howard.
Yeah. Well, I just was very impressed with your work here on this thing, especially the product that your end product there. And I really look forward to seeing that and looking at it closer. But that's really great. And identifying those organizations that are already looking at the financing and funding as being a key factor in stopping the assault on the planet is a great idea. All of those ideas were good, connect with the people, talk to them. I've been into climate a long time too. I lived in a communal farm because of the climate, but I still haven't found the key to making that change, to getting, the big shift. And it's going to be, the longer we wait, the bigger the shift has to be. Anyway, thank you. I could carry on for a while, but I did connect with Jackie Fielder of the Stop the Pipeline. I'm going to be talking to her on Thursday, meet with her on Thursday. And so we'll see where that goes. I just love it that their vision, gets right into the finance stuff there. And I said that I think we have something that might help in that area to focus the change. But we'll see. I would love to show them some of the slides that you made, especially that one where it had the three modes and then the new one, sovereign money. I thought that was, good thing to explain the situation. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Howard. I think it might be appropriate for some of us to hop on a call with you before Thursday and just show you what we could set you up with. And if you wanted a Youth Caucus member to join the call or something, maybe that would make sense too, but you can give us guidance on that. So
absolutely, please. Yeah, let's do it. I meet with her on Thursday. So yeah, tomorrow would be great.
Send us, can you send some times that might work for you, either through the chat to me or to
it's pretty open for me. I mean,
okay.
Stuff could change.
Well, maybe
right now,
maybe what I was going to suggest that maybe the Youth Caucus and Howard, I could start an email thread for us to organize.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea.
Fine. All right, thank you, Howard. Let's go to Mark.
Camera's on. Hey, 2 questions. The first one is, well, I think more of a statement. I would love to see, I had mentioned this earlier, but I would love to see this process on other subject matter. I think it would be just a great tool to use for reaching out to anybody. The second is more of a question. Did you guys discuss, I guess what you would call, not arguments, but disagreements? For instance, if a climate group wants to go a certain direction that's not necessarily in line with monetary reform. Say they want to ask a politician to do something and we're asking them to do something else. Did you guys discuss how you approach those type of disagreements and whether or not you just back off? I'm just curious to know, because I see a lot of bumping heads in monetary circles, and I just wonder how you would deal with that when you get pushed back and people talk about inflation and all the other things that'll come up in those type of conversations. So that's my question.
Does anybody else want to answer that?
Well, I definitely would try to want to avoid that.
My thought on that would be, we didn't discuss that in particular. I think we were just trying to see who the best target would be and to try to prepare some materials for it. So it was really, we were very much more taking the positive approach on that. And we're not trying to talk to every single climate group out there. Yeah, I think, and it was kind of neat with, like Mark, you had said about having it with a different movement or something that would be pretty interesting. And it was pretty sometimes hectic and exciting. We were all amazed after each session how much stuff got done, and I think that's some of the magic of kind of the 80-20. If you got a little too focused on something for a little bit, when you kind of synthesize information from all the different people who are in it, it's amazing how much gets done in bulk. So, and that would be pretty exciting to do again, I think, for if there was another movement that people wanted to participate in a design sprint for.
Great. All right, we've got Mike Holden, and then I think Ben Wiener, I think, was next, and then Franz, or top of the head.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. This was a very good presentation, and I especially like the output. Very well formatted, and you went through a few different iterations. So I thought it was very well put together and thoroughly researched. And it would be very interesting, yes, to take a look at the slides in a bit more detail and read through some of the commentaries. One thing, I have attended many sessions on how to write a presentation. And one of the things that they say is if you're giving the presentation, if it's not like an informative kind of a thing where you're trying to include information and not necessarily a presentation, they say to limit the amount of text on the screen and make sure all the graphs, if you have any graphs, to make them really easy to read, and make sure that all of the information in each of the axes is clearly notated and those kinds of things. So that's just something that I've learned, attending these like how to do a presentation seminar. They say to try to keep each slide, kind of simple and to the point. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But otherwise, very good information. A few other things that I particularly liked were, the kind of researching the intersectionality point between each of these movements. I think that's very complementary to the kind of thing that we're trying to approach with money distribution concepts. And I think that going after researching the intersectionality between each of these kinds of movements is important, and we need to understand that comprehensively, and not just like, oh yeah, well, you know, we could use monetary reform to help these things, and it would help to have that detail. And certainly financing is a big part of how decisions are made, right? And when money is created, how money is created by private institutions, it's for profit and not necessarily for public good. So understanding the proper way to distribute money in society is dependent on understanding, you know, these intersectional kinds of subjects. So I think that it would be very helpful to put that together for other subjects as well, if that was in scope for these kinds of projects. But again, very well done. One thing that I'll say, I guess, in terms of maybe not a criticism per se, but something, a framing issue, is I typically don't like to frame things in terms of the climate debate. You know, I approach the situation in terms of the environmental movement, because there's many other things, you know, things like deforestation, species extinction, ocean pollution, other kinds of pollutions, water contamination, you know, and there are associated movements with each of those. But I think if we frame the subject or the environmental movement around climate, you know, that can be a bit off-putting, because a lot of people, and you know, I kind of empathize with this, it seems like a restriction on the people, you know, and yes, certainly it is an issue, but there are many environmental issues. And for me personally, I like to frame these kinds of conservation activities in terms of, you know, the environmental movement generally. But of course, you know, with this activity, it was very specific around, you know, carbon emissions. And as Govert will testify during the AMI stuff regarding the climate proposal, you know, I made sure that he included the wording about carbon cycle, because of course carbon exists in terms of a cycle where it enters various different parts of the atmosphere and then gets reabsorbed into life and into the soil, and so like understanding the technical details of these kinds of things, I think that is important. So those are my comments, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate those comments too. All right, I got the order wrong earlier. We've got Franz, and then Ben, and then John, and then Virginia.
First of all, can you everyone hear me?
Yes.
You see, I put another external microphone on. So because I noticed that the microphone of my computer is not so strong. Okay, so I have two short questions and two suggestions. The first question is, I know I saw among your collaborators a young man, Jan Vrieswijk, and I started thinking, to what extent has the group been involved with youngsters outside the US? That's the first question. The second question is about the name or the title of the whole project. And that needs explanation. I was wondering and listening carefully when that was done. And so that is the second question. And then my first suggestion is about monetary justice. And of course, monetary justice is even in the name of the organization. But I haven't seen much activity in that regard. And so I started thinking how that can be incorporated. And so one of the things I started is monetary justice for the Unitarian Universalist Association. And with a group in Chapel Hill, we are trying to have other congregations in the nation and also in Canada engage in the study of monetary justice in order for the Alliance to do a statement of conscience about the injustices in the monetary, financial, fiscal, and also the commercial subsystems of the world economy. So that is a suggestion for consideration if you do another project. And then another suggestion which I think is very important, is to have an international framework that encompasses, that is organized on the monetary system, not only reform, but also the transformation, and particularly of the international monetary system, because I think so much is not happening in the various nations because there is no kind of overall view and framework of where we have to go. And so that is my contribution. And as I mentioned earlier, and I sorry for that interruption, basically. So I wrote, so in about 3 days, the website will be up, and that is really focused on transforming money in order to go from monetary reform to international monetary policies. And so, and I hope that particularly the youngsters who have done such a marvelous job as this, that they will go to the website and make their comments there. And so in that way, we get a real exchange and interplay of national and international issues around the monetary solution to the major emergencies, which are, in my opinion, climate and health. And after the Russian aggression, it's also food and governance. And so I see that the monetary thinking, particularly of the sovereign monetary thinking of Joseph Huber and others, is a real pathway forward. And so that might also be a suggestion to look at this in the next project of the Youth Caucus. But overall, I'm very impressed what you have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Franz. Great. Anyone on the Youth Caucus group want to take a shot at those questions?
I think I made comment in the chat, and I'll just reiterate those. I think much of what Franz was saying are great possible design sprint topics. I think, you know, this was a very specific focus for the design sprint we did. And so we weren't necessarily tackling like, is AFJM's mission the end all be all, but we were more focusing on how to target climate groups. So I think using the design sprint model to have those discussions within the Alliance would be beneficial.
Yeah.
I'd just add to that a lot of environmental groups are international, and so perhaps we can do that with new friends from the environmental movement.
All right, great. Ben? Yeah, I think we need to get you unmuted here.
Thank you. I thought you guys gave a great presentation, so thanks for that. I think John brought up a really good point, which was that we need to have a goal that's a focused goal when you're both for the organization itself. What is the fundamental thing that you want to go to different individuals and groups with the ask? What do you want to ask of them? And I think Franz made a great point that this needs to be a more global perspective. I think if you're going to approach a new group, you have to approach them with how you can help them. And if you can't show them that there's going to be a substantial benefit to them in some way by joining forces with you, then it becomes more difficult to engage them in that process. So I think perhaps, and I don't know, maybe this is already within the purview of the alliance groups, but perhaps there is a very focused presentation that could be provided that will show anybody that you're talking to, doesn't matter what the group is, how the use of money in a different way can help them. And I think one of the fundamental things that has to happen in order to really affect real change, substantive change, is that there has to be a unity of groups moving together with a common fundamental theme. So, for instance, if the theme of new monetary reform had a plan to show them, okay, well, there are various aspects of climate change that can be addressed, and there are various needs of people. So let's say you had the ability to show somebody, oh, in my community, the most important thing right now is we don't have any access to clean water. And if your plan was to be able to show them how a new fund could be created through new monetary principles to enable them to have what they need, would they be willing to join the effort to create that process? And just from a global perspective, from a big perspective, what I'm thinking is that the way to use money in the future is to use it in abundance. And you can use blockchain technologies to create money so that it is designed to work its way through the system, to anticipate every need in that system. For instance, if you were going to bring clean water technology to a community, you can anticipate the costs of developing it, providing it, and implementing it in place. And you could create a fund that would enable the creation of that money for that purpose. And the money could be designed using these future technologies, present technologies, blockchain technologies, so that when it reaches the end of the process, it basically evaporates and doesn't come back as profit to enable people to be inordinately enriched or enable entity. So I think what I'm asking, I'm suggesting that, but I'm asking whether your group as would be willing to consider two steps. One is the intermediate steps that you're working on right now to create a level of awareness. The other one would be to, from a bigger perspective, to put a group together that would be willing to say, okay, let's design a blockchain-based monetary system that we could then present to the world. And that would engage, you would need to engage people who are in the blockchain technological realm, who already have envisioned new forms of money. But add to that, for instance, Bitcoin was created in limitation, meaning that there's only a certain amount of it, and that's how they could sell people on engaging in it. But that doesn't help in the long term. If you can take that same technology and say, okay, we're going to design systems so that we can create a fund for every human need. And we're going to make that money available for whatever the need is outstanding. And then we're going to administer it so that you never have to address the concern of what's the word, inflation, where you've created so much money that it becomes worthless because you evaporated it through at the end of the chain. Anyway, my question would be, would the group be willing to engage in that type of future thought where you keep doing what you're doing, but you're also simultaneously developing the plan that you could then present to every progressive organization ultimately out there to bring them together with a very simple message. This is how we can enable your project to be effective. And it happens when we are unified and have enough people that are willing to engage in a new form of monetary system. I've thought about this for a long time, and I'm pretty clear in my thinking that it's very difficult to change from within the existing systems because there's too much resistance from the people who are empowered by the existing way. So you have to think out of the box and come up with a new way. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking and what I would like to propose.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. It sounds like something that, as Ryan mentioned in the box here, could be a design sprint all of its own, you know. And I think this process that we presented today, that I learned, you know, from Duke, but has been kind of honed out in the world, is something that you or anyone else who in the AFJM that might want to lead a design sprint, you know, could do. And if there's interest in doing an intensive look at the proposal that you just made among the group, you know, that's something that could happen. It's, I think, beyond the scope of what we were doing in the Youth Caucus at this time, but we will see. I'm happy to see, you know, with the Youth Caucus, we're meeting on Thursday, you know, if there would be interest in anyone in that group in joining you or leading a design sprint on that topic. Yeah, we have next up John and then Virginia.
Yeah, I just have a rather technical question, actually. Ben and Franz have spoken about big pictures, and I want to ask a little bit about a tactical question that you may have gotten into in your design sprint. And that is, how you contact another organization depends on how that organization is structured. Organization is structured in a very hierarchical way, then you approach it very differently than if it's an organization that depends, for instance, on local organizations at the local level, a national organization. So you find out, did you do any asking of questions about these organizations of that nature, so that you would get some insight into the best way to actually approach that particular organization?
Anybody want to take that question? All right. Oh, Steve, go.
Well, I was gonna say one thing that we did do when we were doing the deep dive section of it, would be we would try to learn as much as we could about each of the individual organizations, and that would include if they were membership, what do you call it, like, you know, different groups in different cities, or because there were a lot of different sizes. These it was a very heterogeneous group of organizations that we looked at. I mean, some were just a few and had like, you know, what is it? Like just a handful of people making a website, and they had lots of statistics. I'm thinking versus other ones that had, you know, very large, some were international. And so it varied quite a bit, and how you'd want to approach them would be a little different. And that's how we'd also play into if you had like a little bit of prep for like before a phone call, and that would be who you talk with. So those were some of my thoughts on that. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Sam.
I would just say that as part of the design sprint, we didn't get into that question specifically, John, but it's clear that that is something that as we work on talking to people and asking for referrals in each of our conversations, that hopefully will, especially with the referrals, get helped through that process.
Yeah, you need to know its structure as to where the points are that would be most effective to make your approach.
You know what I'll say that's pretty interesting from the first 3 conversations we've had? The people are like, in almost every case, they're kind of like, whoa, this is really big. I'm already really busy. Who else can I pass you off to? Yeah, so getting referrals has not been, necessarily a challenge, but you're right. Getting the right referral is going to be important. And I think that actually in some case, the right referral will be the person inside of their organization that's most curious. They may not be the person that's the most strategically placed in the org chart, but if they're the most curious, they'll spend the time with it to figure out the issue enough to be able to represent it within their organization. So we'll have to trust a little bit. All right, we've got Virginia and then Jan.
I just have a brief comment. I've spent a lifetime really dedicated to democratic principles and to facilitation and education. And I've always been interested in what's going out there on the edges of making it all work better. And when we were in Madrid for the IMMR conference, I was just gobsmacked by the ability of this group of young people to facilitate the meeting in really a totally different way, the way they voted, the way they just handled the issues. It was so impressive. And I just want to say right this minute, my heart is really full of gratitude and happiness that you young people have come and brought this model of the next level skills for being effective and being collaborative and being respectful and making things happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. That means a lot coming from you. Jan, let's see if we can help you get unmuted.
And I think it's Jan.
Oh, Jan. Okay.
There she is.
I want to be clear that the folks weren't necessarily passing off because they were trying to get rid of us, but more just because they were trying to be helpful, and recognize that they already either, had a mandate or had a full plate and wanted to make sure that we could get to somebody that could give it full attention. So. I got a question here from Lucille. If there's time, what was the most fun about the design sprint for each of you? Or can each or some of the design sprinters share, albeit briefly, one of the most fun or funniest moments of the sprint for you? And while the design sprinters are thinking of their answer to that question, I think it's a perfect question to end on. Is this a 1.5 hour or 2 hour coffee house?
2 hours.
Oh, perfect. Great. We have time for that and more. I did just want to say that there were 2 things that I just thought I'd share from the first 3 conversations that we've had. One of them was that none of the first 3 folks that we've talked to have been aware of anyone in the climate movement having discussed targeting the privilege of money creation directly instead of targeting, the banks or the central banks to try to limit money creation or for fossil fuels, and at least two of them, actually all three of them, were very intrigued by that idea and were interested and receptive to considering the idea further that there was this third option that might be available that they had. And the big insight for me was that none of the three of them had heard it discussed already. So it seems like would be a new conversation within the climate movement, which is exciting. They all did three, I'll just tell you, caution that getting to Congress to make such a big change seemed like a real lengthy effort and a long shot, but that they could see the value of, at the very least, having that threat on the table. Having that threat on the table might mean that concessions would come more quickly, even while that process is unfolding, that, if that threat was credibly on the table, banks and central banks, for example, might be more likely to do some of the more voluntary measures that they're currently demanding. And so anyway, just want to share those fruitful thoughts. Do we have questions or answers from the Youth Caucus members about what was the most fun part of the design sprint for each of us?
I suppose I could start with one of the things I appreciated. I said sometimes it was hectic, but I appreciated that you started things with breathing exercises to have us grounded. That was a very nice thing to start with, Sam. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was hearing like kind of the synthesis where we'd all been off, like going off on our own, looking at a particular thing. And then when we came back together and hearing, things that were commonality or like, new approaches, the synthesis was really kind of the heart, I thought, of some of this the design approach, the magic of it working, kind of the 80-20. So that was really exciting to see it happen.
Ryan or Fern?
I was hoping Fernanda might share, since she's been awfully quiet, but I could go first if needed.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, goodness. All right. So I would say, I think what was most fun for me is I tend to be the most motivated when I'm working with peers and working with other members of the Youth Caucus, to kind of tie into Lucille's question at the beginning of how did we decide when to meet, how to meet. And, this has been a group that has brought me a lot of joy over the last year and a half. So being able to work on this really neat project with some rad friends that I only get to see virtually was the highlight for me.
Same for me. So I let you all say it a lot more eloquently, but yeah, hanging out with you guys was kind of the best part. And just seeing how productive we could all be when we're like really, we all kind of have a little bit of ADHD syndrome going on. So having peers to be watching what we're doing is really helpful. So the hours went by really quickly and we got a lot done. And the perfectionism didn't get in the way of what we were doing.
And I'll say for me that, having something that both two parts of friendship. One was kind of forging friendships more closely with the folks of the Youth Caucus, just meeting once a month. I wouldn't say that I necessarily felt like I'd gotten to know, the folks on the Youth Caucus. But after putting in, 12 hours in just a few weeks of working shoulder to shoulder with each other, I really felt like I could say everyone in the Youth Caucus is now my friends. And the other friendship part of that was that I invited two friends to join the youth. I invited like at least 5 or 6 people to join the Youth Caucus, to join the design sprint, and 2 of them came. And one of them I asked to do the music at the beginning of the design sprint while we were tuning in, and he put on some like super steamy music that made me laugh really hard and was awkward for me. But yeah, that was funny.
Thank you for each sharing. That was great. Steve has mentioned a couple of times the 80-20. I don't think, I know that from some other contexts, but is that 80% research and 20% product, or what is it?
Yeah, from what I understand, it's this idea that in general, like 80% of the results when you're working on something come from only 20% of the work. You know, it's getting those a few things right that produces 80% of the results. And so if you can identify what's the 20% that we really need to get right in order to get it 80% right without going for perfection. Yeah. So I don't know why they say it. The phrase is, I always hear it said 80-20 instead of 20-80, but it really seems like it should be 20-80 because that's what you're doing, is you're looking for the 20% that gets you the 80% of the results.
Thank you.
All right, we've got John and then Adrian.
Yeah, you know, I'm really thrilled with what you've been doing here, because one of the problems that I've had from the beginning with the monetary reform movement is that it's always struck me as a solution without a problem. And I always remember John Glazer, who was briefly on our board, but unfortunately passed away and was only on for a brief period of time. But he was into the business of social entrepreneurship. That is to say, reaching out to people to invest in things that doesn't give them just the bottom line of money, but the bottom line of social value as well. And what he always said was, in approaching people, you got to be able to highlight for them the problem. Matter of fact, you got to have them identify a problem for which you can offer a solution. And essentially, by going to a group like you've gone through to, these groups in environmental, they focus on the problem. And it's the problem that a lot of people are aware of. And so now it gives us opportunity to collaborate with them because we have a solution. Now, one of the other things that's important that I found out with the League of Women Voters, one of the things they're interested in is democracy. And we made the point that one of the things that threatens democracy is the concentration of wealth. Because once you have the concentration of wealth, then you have the problem of that wealth overwhelming the electoral process, which the League is all about. So that forced us to ask the question, well, what processes concentrate wealth? And the money creation is certainly one, but it's not the only one. And so other people are concerned about these other processes, whether it's getting a more progressive tax system or worrying about monopolistic pricing and monopolistic control of wages. But all of these things are involved. So in our pushing the monetary aspect of it, what we had to do was to acknowledge the legitimacy of the efforts that were going on in these other areas toward the same goal. And I think we have to do that in operating with other organizations too, realizing that we have an important solution, but they have solutions too that may be piecemeal, they may be as they are, but they're important too and they're legitimate. So that we collaborate with them in what they're trying to do, in the problem they're trying to solve, recognizing the way they're working on it now is legitimate, and we have another way to work on it that may be helpful too. And these are both ways that we should proceed. And some of them are more immediate, and so they're appealing to people because there's a result you can show. It's true, the monetary reform is a hell of a problem in terms of actually getting there. But nevertheless, it needs to be kept in mind as the goal, as to the best way, the most complete way to accomplish, whether it's climate change or protection of democracy or meeting human needs all of these things. So the idea of collaborating with people who focus on problems, that we have a solution, and it's one of several parallel solutions that we work jointly with them to move forward. And I think what you've modeled here is really points the way to do that kind of thing.
I'll tell you what, just something that I'm getting fired up about, just listening to you all, is the idea of a first intergenerational design sprint. So, you know, crossing the borders, there's clearly a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience on the group tonight that would be fun to have in a high intensity, you know, co-working experience. Right.
You said the word fun there. Ooh, that's
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
yeah, but
I think
the
everyone-
intergenerational one would be fun too. That's
Yes.
inspiring.
It would be, for sure. All right, let's next we got Adrian. Hi. Yes. Thank you. These are all really good ideas for design sprints. All right. Yes, go. That's the impression I've gotten as well. All right. So we've got 6 minutes left. Anything, let me see, I'm trying to think of maybe something that we could do to wrap up on a high note. We've had a lot of really kind comments and appreciations this evening from folks hearing about our work. I just had an idea, which is, I think it'd be really nice to hear from the Youth Caucus some appreciations for the larger AFJM and the opportunity to show up in this organization and have support to have a Youth Caucus and be able to also tap the wisdom of others and have an umbrella to operate under. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So these are some of my appreciations, is being able to show up in the Alliance for Just Money, find like-minded people, find people who have done a ton of research, find people who have gone ahead and created a masthead under which to stand and or to which to contribute, and with which to be able to do outreach and say, I'm reaching out as a member of the Alliance for Just Money. All of these things are gifts and are, just something that we're definitely standing on the shoulders of when we did this design sprint and as we've been doing these initial outreach conversations. So thank you all to the larger AFJM for your role in making this possible. I see, Ryan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a few things have come to mind in conversation. I want to say it was Jan, maybe. I could assign this comment to the wrong person, but somebody mentioned, you might have a conversation with somebody and then down the road they'll come back and ask the money question a little deeper. And I remember back when I was at university and Lucille mentioned the money question and I was like, yep, cool, great. And I wasn't ready to sign on to it until like 5 or 6 years later. And so that leads me into my next thank you, which is for each of us in the Youth Caucus. We were brought to the Alliance for Just Money from the elders in this group and in this space in one way, shape, or form. So it is a collaborative effort, and I want to thank you all for teaching us in whatever capacity that you have, because we wouldn't be the Youth Caucus if it weren't for you all and the work that you've done to get the Alliance to Just Money in the space that it is. And also a thank you for the opportunity for the Youth Caucus to shine in the ways that it does, because having this space is what has kept us in the movement. And your support, in whether it's just through giving us a round of applause when we're like, hey, look at what we did as the Youth Caucus, or hey, come try something new with the Youth Caucus. Your support has been motivating to us and is what holds us together. So thank you. And yes, a huge shout out to Bo Young, because I cannot believe I did not mention that, but Bo Young was the one that was like, hey, let me sign on to that and whatever supports you need. And Bo Young is really great at getting you connected with the right people and really using her energy to find the support that you need. So whether you're the Youth Caucus or anybody else, Bo Young is a great resource for that. And yes, huge shout out to Bo Young. And we wish you could be here.
Yeah, if you're watching this recording, Bo Young, thank you so much. Bo Young was a fantastic contributor to the design sprint and formation of it as well. Fern or Steve?
Thanks to Sam for designing the design sprint and being behind the scenes, playing around with all the slides we were making and beautifying them as we went along. And of course, to the entirety of Alliance for Just Money for supporting us as the Youth Caucus and that we're trying to accomplish. It's little baby activists in this role. You teach us a lot.
Yeah. Well, we hope that like what is it? We'll be able to sign it for some more endorsements, and like we really do appreciate having like we are standing on the shoulders of people who brought him in. I'd like to thank John, who gave a presentation that brought me to the group, and so like it is really wonderful that the Alliance for Just Money supports the Youth Caucus, and it is very motivating to have a space that we're able to like co-work in, and it can be a pretty exciting dynamic. So I very much appreciate that part of the Alliance for Just Money. So thanks.
Awesome. Well, that's the top of the hour. Thank you all for staying on for the whole 2 hours and contributing so fully. Hope you have a beautiful evening sleep and rest of your week.
Thank you all so very much. It's fabulous.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your evening, everybody.
Great job, everybody.